Millionaire's son was traumatized for 9 months. What the maid did that day changed everything. Most 6-year-olds spend their summers racing across sandy beaches, shouting in playful chases, or sitting for hours coloring their favorite dinosaur pictures. But Liam Harper isn't most children. He hasn't spoken a single word in the 9 months since he stood by his mother's grave, watching the casket lower into the earth. In the coastal home where waves crash steadily beyond the windows and sunlight bounces off every white wall, silence seeps into every corner. Daniel Harper, Liam's father, a renowned interior architect, chooses to work far more than necessary. For him, grief is a storm you can outrun if you sign enough contracts, design enough spaces, fill enough hours. But every evening, Daniel steps back into a quiet so deep that even his own footsteps echo, cold and hollow. Liam is usually in his room, the door slightly ajar, a faint glow spilling out, but no words, no laughter, just a silent presence. It isn't the silence of peace, it's the silence of empty spaces no one has dared to touch. Daniel has tried everything. Child psychologists, pediatricians, short and long therapy sessions, specially designed communication games. Yet every attempt ends the same way, in silence. Liam doesn't resist, but he doesn't respond either. Each day, Daniel tells himself he's doing his best for his son, but somewhere deep down, he knows he's running too. Because facing Liam's silence means facing his own loss, and he's not sure he's ready for that. We often think children need big solutions to heal. Better schools, advanced therapy, carefully structured activities. But sometimes, what a hurting child needs most is far simpler. Not a plan, not a method, but someone willing to stay, to listen, even when there are no answers. Before this story begins, ask yourself, what do you think is the most important thing a grieving child needs to begin to heal? Daniel hadn't planned to be home that day. His 3-day business trip to Boston was canceled at the last minute when a client postponed. He didn't tell his assistant, didn't message anyone in the house. Maybe part of him wanted to walk through the door into a familiar space where no one was waiting, no one asking questions. On the drive back, he pictured the usual scene. A cold front hall, the sound of the ocean muffled by thick glass, and Liam in his room, silent like a small ghost. Only the steady breathing of the sea and his own footsteps breaking the emptiness. But today, as the door closed behind him, Daniel heard something else. Laughter. At first it was faint, like an echo from memory, but then it grew clear, alive, and it struck him square in the chest. Child's laughter, loud, unrestrained, free. He froze, heart skipping a beat. It couldn't be Liam. Not the Liam who hadn't laughed like that in 9 months. Leaving his suitcase in the entryway, Daniel followed the sound down the hall to the glass garden room at the back of the house. What he saw made him forget to breathe. Liam was riding on the back of a woman, gripping her shoulders, his whole body shaking with laughter. The woman was on all fours, moving like a playful pony, her long brown hair tied back with a few strands falling loose around her face. It was Clara Evans, the part-time housekeeper Daniel had hired only to keep the place tidy, cook simple meals, and stay invisible. During the interview, he hadn't asked much, didn't care about her past. Just a short-term arrangement. Yet here she was, not only breaking the house's unspoken rule, but shattering the wall of silence around Liam. Liam's laughter came in bursts, punctuated by little gasps for breath, while Clara neighed dramatically, shaking her shoulders so he laughed harder. Daniel stood in the doorway, afraid to move, afraid the moment would vanish. This wasn't just laughter. This was life returning. The boy in front of him wasn't the Liam of the past 9 months. He was the Liam from before everything fell apart. Clara glanced up and met Daniel's eyes. Her smile didn't falter, nor did it turn into awkwardness. She gently helped Liam slide down, slowly letting each small foot touch the floor. Then she said one simple word. "Hi." It wasn't a polite greeting. It was presence. Daniel, still rooted in place, could only manage, "What is this?" Clara didn't answer right away. She let Liam walk toward his father, each step a little shaky, but certain. When the boy looked up at Daniel, his smile still intact, Daniel froze. His son, who for nearly a year had not spoken, not smiled, not moved like this, was now breathing into his father's neck as if he had never been hurt at all. Daniel lowered himself onto the bench beneath the ivy-covered arch, and Liam gradually calmed, his small fingers unconsciously stroking the fabric of his father's shirt. 1,000 burning questions rushed through his mind. Why now? How? What had Clara done that so many specialists had failed to do? But when he looked at her, the words wouldn't come. She sat opposite him, back straight, at ease, as though this moment carried none of the weight it did for him. "I wasn't trying to fix him," she said before he could ask. "I just listened. He's been speaking to me, in his own way." Daniel clenched his jaw, his hand trembling slightly as he held his son. He wanted to deny it, to chalk it up to luck or coincidence. But deep down, he knew better. This woman had found the road into Liam's world, a place where Daniel had long since lost the map. And by doing less, by simply being there, she had brought back something he thought had been buried with Sophie. "You're not just a housekeeper," he murmured. Clara only gave a small shrug. "I wasn't trying to be anything else, just someone who didn't walk past him." He returned to his study, poured himself a glass of wine, and replayed that moment in his mind. The sound of that laugh, the look in Liam's eyes, the way Clara hadn't flinched under his scrutinizing gaze. It wasn't professional expertise that had reached his son. It was presence, the very thing he himself had failed to give for months. Daniel wasn't ready to say it out loud. Not yet. But the thought clung to him the entire next day as he moved quietly through the coastal house like a ghost. He kept waiting for the miracle to vanish, for Liam to retreat back into silence and detachment. But it didn't happen. Liam followed Clara like a shadow, silent, yet alert, observant, always watching her. The boy didn't speak, but he responded. When Clara hummed, he tapped out the rhythm with his fingers. When she told him to choose a color, he pointed. When she sat on the floor, he sat beside her. Daniel watched from a distance, careful not to disturb the fragile trust that seemed to be growing. Clara never acted as if she noticed him there. She didn't perform for him, didn't narrate like the therapists did. She simply stayed with Liam. And that unsettled him in a way he couldn't quite name. He realized he didn't know how to just be with his son. Clara did, effortlessly. She didn't see Liam as a problem to solve, but as a person waiting to be heard. In the days that followed, Daniel found himself watching Clara more closely. Not in the way of someone supervising an employee, but like a man searching for an answer he's never been able to grasp. Clara never sat across from Liam with flashcards or a notebook to track progress. She didn't fire off probing questions or dangle rewards for compliance. Instead, she was present in a way so simple it felt almost impossible. In the mornings, Daniel saw them in the kitchen. Clara was cutting fruit into clumsy yet imaginative shapes, a banana bent into a giraffe's neck, slices of strawberry forming butterfly wings. Liam stood beside the counter, silent, his eyes following her every move. When Clara asked, "Do you think this is a giraffe or a goose?" Liam gave the faintest smile. Daniel blurted without thinking, "Is he smiling?" Clara glanced up at him, voice calm. Smiling isn't broken. It wasn't sarcastic, but it landed in him like a jolt. He couldn't remember the last time he'd expected a smile from his son. Clara didn't treat silence as a problem to solve. She treated it as its own language, something worth listening to. When Liam handed her a leaf, she accepted it as if it were a precious gift. When he sat beside her, she didn't rush to fill the quiet with questions. Daniel began to realize Liam wasn't responding because someone was trying to help him. He was responding because someone accepted him exactly as he was. In the afternoons, Daniel often stood in the doorway to the living room, watching Liam and Clara sit on the floor, piecing together a puzzle or coloring. Clara didn't narrate their activities for him, nor did she try to showcase any skill. She simply existed there with Liam as if time had no urgency. What unsettled Daniel most was the gentleness of it. He had tried every proper method to pull his son out of his shell, and failed. Clara, with nothing but presence, was opening doors he'd long believed were sealed shut. One evening, as Clara and Liam sat reading, Daniel heard her spinning a tale about a fox who taught math in the forest. Liam said nothing, but his eyes lit up with every turn of the story. Clara didn't need him to answer in words. She could read his response in the way he watched her. Daniel understood then what Clara was doing wasn't fixing. It was being with someone without turning them into a project. And perhaps that was something he had never managed to do for his own son. That afternoon, while gathering laundry along the second-floor hallway, Clara noticed a small pair of socks roll to her feet. She bent to pick them up, following the trail, and saw Liam playing laundry basketball by himself. One missed throw had sent the socks skidding far down the hall, slipping under the door at the very end. Clara walked over and tried the handle. Locked. Strange, since every other room in the house was open. She pressed her ear to the door but heard nothing. No hum of ventilation, no ticking clock, just a dense, unmoving stillness. Later that evening, as she poured orange juice for Liam in the kitchen, Clara asked Daniel casually, without edge or implication, "The room at the end of the upstairs hall. What's in there?" The moment the question left her lips, Daniel's expression shifted, as if someone had switched off all the lights inside him. He didn't answer right away, just stared at the wooden countertop, as though facing a crack he couldn't repair. Then he said, low but final, "Nobody goes in there." That was it. No explanation, no room for follow-up. Clara nodded, smoothly changing the subject to grocery deliveries. But inside, the question lingered, not out of idle curiosity, but because she felt the weight in his voice. That door wasn't just locked with a key, it was locked with a memory Daniel wasn't ready to touch. Late that night, after Liam was asleep, Clara sat on the floor of her room, her tea long gone cold. Memories of her own silences rose unbidden. She knew silence doesn't protect you from pain. It only buries it deeper. She didn't intend to force Daniel to face it yet, but she believed in small reminders, in gentle signals, that a door doesn't have to stay shut forever. She went to the kitchen, warmed a glass of milk the way her grandmother used to after nightmares, and took a small piece of paper. In a few plain words she wrote, "You don't have to open it. Just don't keep it closed forever." She placed the milk and note directly before the door, aligning them neatly, then walked away without knocking. No drama, no symbolism, just a message, like an open hand. By morning, the milk was gone, the note vanished. Daniel said nothing about it, but that evening, when they crossed paths in the hallway, Clara noticed his shoulders were less rigid, his eyes a touch softer. She didn't say a word. Sometimes the deepest changes begin with the smallest gestures. One afternoon, while Clara was folding laundry on the sofa, Liam sat on the floor rummaging through an old plastic bin in the corner. It was filled with odds and ends, toy cars missing wheels, dried-out markers, and a few books with cracked spines. A faint click made Clara look up. She saw Liam holding a small black object, his fingers curiously pressing its buttons. She walked over and knelt beside him. "What did you find?" she asked, her voice as light as a breeze. Liam turned it in his hands. It was an old voice recorder, the kind that ran on AA batteries, its plastic faded with age. Clara opened the battery cover and found a corroded pair inside. She tossed them in the trash and smiled. "Let's see if I can find new ones. Give me 10 minutes. 10 minutes later, Clara returned with fresh batteries. She slid them in, switched the recorder on, and showed Liam how to press the red button to record, the black one to play. When his own voice echoed back through the tiny speaker, Liam's eyes widened and he hugged the recorder like it was treasure. For the rest of the afternoon, he carried it everywhere. Sometimes he recorded the sound of footsteps, other times the creak of a door. Clara didn't interfere, only remarking now and then, "You can record anything, sounds, thoughts, even silence." Then she added softly, "Sometimes silence is the most honest sound." That evening, Daniel noticed Liam still clutching the recorder at dinner. He raised an eyebrow. "Did you give him that?" Clara shook her head. "No, he found it. I just gave it power." Daniel didn't press, but his eyes followed the boy as if trying to read what was unfolding. Late that night, after the house had gone still, Liam slipped out of bed, the recorder held close to his chest. He sat on the stairwell landing where shadow and dim light met. His small finger hovered over the red button, hesitating for a long time. His breathing quickened. Then, summoning all his courage, he pressed it. A click, a few seconds of silence, and then, very softly, his voice, rough, hesitant, but clear. "Clara?" Just one word. The boy stared at the recorder as if he couldn't believe it was his own voice. He pressed stop, didn't replay it, only held it tighter and sat quietly in the dark. The next morning, as she cleared the breakfast dishes, Clara noticed the recorder lying next to Liam's cereal bowl. She picked it up, intending to set it on a shelf, but her hand paused over the play button. A hunch made her press it, the mechanical whir, a few seconds of silence, and then, "Clara!" Her knees gave way. Clara sank to the kitchen floor, eyes wide as tears blurred her vision. She covered her mouth, but the muffled sob still escaped. It wasn't magic. It was trust, slowly woven, thread by thread, through months of quiet persistence. Daniel stepped in, freezing when he saw her on the floor. "Clara?" She held the recorder out to him, whispering, "Last night, he said my name." Daniel pressed play. When Liam's voice filled the air, he went still. A man who had heard countless clinical assessments, who had resigned himself to the thought that his son might never speak again, now stood silenced by a single word. "Jesus," he murmured, eyes shining. Clara wiped her cheeks, her voice low but steady. It wasn't an accident. He knew what he was doing. Daniel glanced toward the hallway, picturing Liam sitting somewhere, quietly watching. "So, what do we do?" Clara replied. "We don't rush it. We don't make it a spectacle. We just keep showing up." Daniel nodded, holding the recorder tight. The word Clara was a small promise, but enough to light the whole house. Dinner was no longer something Daniel had to endure. It became something he looked forward to. Clara cooked with Liam nearby. Sometimes he stood on a chair, other times crouched on the floor stacking spoons or folding napkins. They didn't speak much, but the rhythm between them flowed effortlessly. Every so often, Clara would hand Daniel a plate and say, "Liam helped with this one." And no matter what it was, it instantly felt special. One evening, after Clara left the table, Daniel stayed behind to clear the dishes. Liam stood by the sink, holding a sponge. Daniel bent down, said nothing, and held out his hand. Liam placed the sponge in his palm so gently, then walked away in silence. Daniel kept that moment as if it were a fragile piece of glass, afraid to break it. Later, passing Clara in the hallway, he said, "He gave me the sponge," almost laughing at himself. Clara only replied, "That means he's letting you into his world." Then she walked away. No analysis, no added words. Daniel leaned back against the wall for a long while after that, wondering how many things his son had already said without speaking. It was the smallness of these moments that made them unforgettable. Clara never prolonged them or tried to give them deeper meaning before Liam was ready. She was gentle with him in a way Daniel was still learning, through space, time, and silence. Daniel began sitting in the same room while they played, pretending to read or check his phone, when in truth he just wanted to understand the rhythm between them. Clara never commented on his presence. Only once, without looking up, she said, "You can draw too, even if it's terrible." He chuckled softly, picked up a crayon, and drew a crooked tree. Liam glanced over, blinked, then handed him a green crayon. Not a word, just a gift. It almost broke Daniel's heart. Liam gave through gestures, and every gesture felt sacred. Daniel stopped measuring progress by the number of words his son spoke. He began to see what Clara had seen all along. Connection didn't have to be spoken. It was built through presence, patience, and choosing to stay, even when nothing was said. That night, Daniel walked into the living room expecting the usual scene. Clara reading or tidying up, Liam playing quietly. But this time was different. Clara and Liam were lying on the rug, their heads nearly touching, surrounded by crayons and sheets of paper scattered like a spilled rainbow. Liam wasn't just coloring, he was focused, drawing with careful precision. Daniel came closer, sat at the edge of the rug, not intruding, just watching. A few minutes later, Liam looked up and pushed a sheet of paper toward him. On it were 3 stick figures, one tall, one medium, one small, holding hands. One had long hair, one wore a tie, one had a dinosaur shirt. Daniel looked at the drawing and felt his throat tighten. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't detailed, but it was them, a family. For the first time in so long, he didn't feel like a stranger in his own story. Liam looked at him, not smiling, not speaking, but staying, and Daniel felt deep down that he was still a father. The next day, Daniel received an unexpected call from a partner in New York. A major project had just launched, requiring him to meet with investors. He hadn't left the state in months, and logic told him this was an opportunity he shouldn't pass up. While Clara and Liam were rearranging the bookshelf, Daniel stepped into the kitchen, trying to sound casual. "I have to go to New York, flying out tonight." Clara only nodded, not asking why. "I'll take care of Liam." That was the problem. Daniel knew she'd do it well, too well, whether he was there or not, and that made him feel like he was running away. The afternoon passed quietly. Liam was less engaged than usual, as if sensing something. Clara didn't mention Daniel's trip, but when he came down the stairs with his suitcase, the boy wasn't in the living room. "He's in the playroom," Clara said softly. "Didn't want dinner?" Daniel nodded, stepping into the hall to grab his briefcase. When he opened the outer pocket of the suitcase, a crumpled sheet of paper stuck out. He pulled it free and unfolded it. It was a crayon drawing, an airplane with red flames trailing from its tail. On the ground stood a small figure, arms raised, eyes drawn wide with thick blue tears falling. Beside it, in awkward letters, were just 2 words: "Liam sad." Daniel stood frozen. The boy wasn't begging him to stay, wasn't crying, just delivering a message sharper than any speech. Slowly, he folded the drawing and tucked it back into the suitcase, then carried the suitcase back upstairs. He wasn't going anywhere. Daniel found Liam curled up in the corner of the playroom, clutching a stuffed dinosaur. The boy didn't look up when he entered, but Daniel sat down beside him. He had no speech prepared. He just spoke the truth. "I was going to leave. Told myself it was just work, but really I was scared. You're making progress. Starting to talk, starting to trust, and I didn't know if I could meet you where Clara has." Liam stayed silent, but tilted his head slightly. Daniel met his eyes. "I don't want to be the dad who always leaves. Not anymore." A pause. Then the boy scooted closer, his shoulder brushing Daniel's. No words, just a touch. But for Daniel, it was enough. That evening, Daniel walked into the kitchen while Clara was wiping the counter. "I missed my flight," he said. She didn't look up. "I figured. He's been different since you sat with him." Daniel nodded. "I can't keep running." This time Clara looked at him, not surprised, but with something like recognition. "No, you can't." They didn't exchange thanks or explanations. They simply stood there, side by side, with a decision made. He would stay. The next morning, Liam dashed down the hallway, chasing a crayon that had rolled from his hand. He moved a little too fast, and his socks slid on the polished wood floor, sending him off balance. The thud came first, then a short, sharp cry that sliced straight into Daniel's chest. He was in his office, but bolted out instantly, feet barely touching the ground. By the time he reached him, Liam was curled up, clutching his knee, tears spilling fast. "Hey, hey, shh, you're okay," Daniel murmured, his voice unsteady. He crouched, scooping Liam into his arms, feeling the small body trembling hard against him. "Daddy's here. I've got you." The words came out instinctively, without thought. He didn't realize he'd called himself Daddy until Liam lifted his head mid-sob, lips trembling. "Daddy." Daniel froze. That single word, one he'd long believed lost, hit him so hard it blurred the edges of everything around him. "Did you just—" He couldn't finish before Liam tightened his hold around his neck. Daniel let out a laugh, tangled with a sob, whispering, "You called me. You really called me Daddy." Tears streamed down his face, but this time they weren't from pain. They were release. That Daddy wasn't just a title. It was an invitation back in, a passport into his son's world once more. At the far end of the hall, Clara stood still, her hands loosely clasped. She'd heard it, but didn't step forward. This wasn't her moment to enter. She quietly backed away, turning into another room, leaving father and son together in the pale morning light. Daniel sat down on the floor, still holding Liam, murmuring words that didn't form sentences, just sounds to let him know he was there. Whether Liam spoke again tomorrow or fell silent, Daniel knew something had shifted forever. One word had broken through a wall he once thought unbreakable. That night, the sea breeze was cool, and the sky looked as if it had been dusted with 1,000 shards of crystal. Daniel stood on the back porch, hands in his pockets, eyes fixed on the dark horizon. The steady rhythm of the waves felt like a giant clock, marking time in slow, deliberate beats. He heard soft footsteps behind him and knew instantly it was Clara. She didn't speak, just came to stand beside him, close enough to feel her warmth, though their shoulders didn't touch. After a long silence, Clara spoke. "There's a boy I've never told anyone about. His name was Jordan." Daniel tilted his head, waiting. "I was his live-in nanny for over a year. He was 4, bright, curious eyes, but shy. And then one day, he stopped talking. No one knew why. His parents believed in acting fast, so they filled his schedule with back-to-back therapy sessions and evaluations. He hated all of it. I begged them to give him time, just leave him be for a while. They didn't agree. I was let go. I told myself I'd come back to visit." She drew in a deep breath, still looking out to the sea. "But I never made it. Jordan was hospitalized for something else entirely. And he passed away. I wasn't there. I never said goodbye." Daniel stayed silent, but he could hear more than her words. He could hear the space behind them, the kind of void he knew too well. Clara went on, slower now. "I've always thought I failed him, not because I didn't care, but because I believed I had more time. I was wrong." Daniel swallowed hard, feeling an invisible hand press against his chest. He hadn't meant to speak, but the words came out low and rough. "I know what that feels like." Clara turned toward him, frowning faintly. Daniel rarely spoke about himself, especially about losing Sophie. The day Sophie died, I wasn't there." His laugh was short, not from amusement, but from the reflex of someone trying to shield himself. "She was in a car accident on her way home. They called me when she was already in the ER. By the time I got there, all that was left was a white room, the smell of antiseptic, and a sheet pulled over her." He paused, taking a deep breath, though his shoulders stayed tense. I kept thinking, if I'd left work earlier, if I hadn't taken that client call, maybe it would have been different. I've lived with that what if for 9 months. Clara didn't interrupt. Her gaze held no pity, only the kind of listening that made a person feel less alone in their own story. Daniel went on. "When I saw Liam withdraw into silence, I thought I had to do something. So I called doctors, specialists, tried every therapy I could. I thought I was fighting for him. But really, I was just trying to fix something broken, as if loss could be repaired by filling it with effort. And I forgot. Sometimes the only thing a child needs is someone to sit beside them, even when there's nothing to say." The sea breeze lifted a strand of Clara's hair. She spoke softly, but firmly. "When I met Liam, I saw Jordan in him. Not his face, but the silence. The way a child can look straight through people as if they've decided no one can reach them. And that scared me. Not because I doubted him, but because I doubted myself. I was afraid I'd miss my chance to stay again." Daniel looked at her for a long moment. "You didn't fail Jordan," he said, his voice steadier than he expected. "You were the only one who truly saw him." Clara's smile was small, tinged with sadness. Being seen was never enough. They said nothing more. Above them, the night sky was a black canvas strewn with glittering dust, and beneath them, the waves kept their heartbeat rhythm. Both knew. Clara stayed not to save anyone, but to make sure she never turned away again. And for the first time in months, Daniel didn't feel like he was standing alone in the dark. In the weeks that followed, Daniel began showing up more in the moments between Liam and Clara. At first, he lingered in the doorway, watching them build Lego towers or color pictures. But gradually, he sat down beside them, taking a puzzle piece or filling in a small corner of a drawing. Liam didn't push him away. In fact, sometimes the boy placed a piece in his hand, as if quietly saying, "You belong here too." One afternoon, Clara suggested they clean out the room that had once belonged to Sophie. Daniel hesitated. It was the room that had been locked for so long. But this time, he nodded. When they opened the door, dust coated everything. Sophie's familiar scent lingered just enough to make Daniel breathe deep and slow his steps. Liam wandered in, eyes scanning the space as if discovering a new world. Clara said nothing, simply picked up a rag and began wiping. They weren't cleaning to erase, they were cleaning to make it Liam's room, a place that kept memories but also allowed for new ones. On the blank white wall, Clara brought out a box of paint. The three of them decided to press their handprints there. Liam chose blue, Clara green, Daniel orange. When they'd washed their hands, Liam picked up a crayon and wrote one word just below the prints. Family. Daniel stood still, staring at it for a long time. No embellishment, no decoration, just a word, but enough to fill the whole room. Clara smiled, and Liam stood between them, his small hands holding theirs, as if afraid that letting go might make it all disappear. Daniel squeezed his son's hand, then Clara's. And for the first time in a long while, he felt the house was no longer a container for painful memories, but a place where people truly lived. That evening, the late sun poured through the living room window, bathing the house in warm gold. Clara was arranging a vase on the table. Liam sat beside her with a picture book fresh from the library. Daniel walked in, hands still marked with paint from fixing the shelves. No one spoke, but the peace that filled the room felt like everyone had finally found where they belonged. Daniel sat next to Liam, turning the next page. The boy leaned his head against his father's shoulder, no words needed. Clara looked at the moment, knowing deep down her presence was no longer help. She was part of this now. The quiet stretched, warm and complete, until Daniel finally spoke. Stay, not as help, as part of this home. Clara paused for a breath, but his gaze didn't waver. It wasn't a polite invitation, nor an obligation. It was the voice of a man who had decided not to let what mattered slip away again. She smiled without hesitation. I'll stay, because this is where I belong. Liam looked up, his eyes brighter than the evening sun. He said nothing, just wrapped his arms around both Daniel and Clara. Outside, the waves kept their steady rhythm against the shore, like a distant, familiar heartbeat. Inside, laughter and gentle conversation began to take the place of the silence that had once filled everything. No one said family again. They didn't have to. It was there already, living in every touch, every glance, every moment where no one left.